Can I ask them questions?
Yes.
So, um, since you have a different perspective, obviously, on humanity, if you were a human, how would you best use your humanity experience?
First, Sarah, let us say greetings upon you.
Thank you.
Please ask your question again.
If you were to advise humanity, a human being, as to how they could use their life most efficiently, what kind of advice would you like to share?
We would say that the most important thing for the human life is to release their woundedness, to release their sense of injury from the journey of life, and to allow things to let go and just to allow the experience of life just to be. There is no need to judge the harshness of life. You experience it, you learn the lessons, and you let go and grow from them without allowing them to impinge upon your light. For even in the moment as your light may contract, the goal is to make sure that your light expands on the backside. So even if you have been through something terrible, if you have been through something traumatic and painful, we feel that the thing that can most help to elevate that of humanity and the consciousness thereof is to let go of those wounds, to release them so that one can be more in tune with who they truly are, which is not that of a wounded being. It is one of magnanimous light expressing itself. And the compassion that lies within that light to unfold in a beautiful, harmonious way that when you remove the woundedness, naturally shows up.
It's beautiful. Many situations in a human's life produce anger amongst the human. How can a human deal with their anger so that they can do this and move past it?
For starters, we would say that much anger is misplaced. So to start with, asking oneself, why does something make them angry? And usually what one would come to the conclusion of is their anger is ego driven. It comes from a personal feeling within them that may not have to do with the truth of the matter, but may have to do with wounded ego or emotions, harsh emotions that they don't necessarily process or look at from any variety of ways, right? So you can take a problem and you can take a situation and you can approach it from various perspectives. You can approach it from the gross physical perspective. You can approach it from the emotional perspective. You can approach it from the spiritual perspective. And when you move into the spiritual perspective, what you find is that all things work for the highest good, even under the perception of pain and suffering. When it doesn't work for the highest good is when one does not allow for the energy of transformation to actually manifest or for the lessons to be learned. And thus they end up repeating the harshness, which drags them deeper into the negative frequency. So instead of growing, instead of learning, instead of repeating the same things that brought them to those problems, they hold on to them and they get angry about them and they allow them to re-wound themselves and thus pass on those wounds to others. And so we would say that within the framework of one's anger, to look at that anger and to see what it's actually doing. Is it just impacting somebody? and they feel violated, or they feel like their own beliefs were challenged, and how dare somebody. If that's the case, that's simply ego. That's not real. That's just a clashing of personalities, one with another. And both of those personalities are probably wrong in those situations. Or they may have partial truths, which one may have a partial truth and the other may have a partial truth. That if they were to explore those, they may find a more complete truth. But if they're angry, they'll never see that because they feel like they were violated, or like something was done against them, when it's not necessarily the case. In instances where something actually was done against them, it's best to just let those situations go and learn the lessons from those experiences and set better boundaries, and to learn and grow from them instead of becoming hardened by them, or to become in fear because of them.
Most humans are told from the higher self that they need to let go. They need to let things go. But I'm wondering, how do people let things go?
It's a decision, Sarah. So within most people, when they say they want to let go of something, there's a lot of things attached to that. There's a lot of stories. There's a lot of personal perceptions. There's a lot of personal identifiers that they have created as part of their story. It gives them something to talk about with other people. And so they've made it part of their identity. So for someone to let something go, they need to dislodge it as being part of their identity. And thus they take away the power of it, and they're able to move freely because it's no longer who they are. It's just something that happened.
Okay, I see. Okay, interesting.
People define themselves, generally speaking, by their injuries, and then they use those injuries as stories and talking points to either sabotage themselves, or to injure and hurt others, or as a catalyst for their own personal growth and well-being to move higher.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. People use their stories, their injuries to define themselves. Huh. Well, what about in this time period? It appears like more people that are working on themselves are trying to find their tribes again. But a lot of people, on the other hand, are feeling backstabbed by people. So there's this polarity issue where people are hard to trust and you need better boundaries, yet you're supposed to be closer with other people. How does a person do this these days?
So we would go back to a previous statement, which is when someone does feel backstabbed or betrayed, realize that it's nothing personal, it's the other person. So again, it's not yours. So don't make it yours. Don't create the story that what happened is anything other than what happened. You don't need to transform yourself into some negative manner or negative way of being. One thing that we would reiterate to you, Sarah, is recall that the Archon is very present on the planet. And so the Archon is in a constant state of sabotage. And especially when you have positive groups, right? And you have someone within that group that has not necessarily worked on themselves or developed themselves or closed the doors or the gateways for the Archon to enter the energy field, the Archon will insert itself in those situations to test the boundaries and the walls, so to speak. And if the walls are weak, the Archon will oftentimes self-destruct those groups of consciousness that could potentially pose a threat to it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that
And so
makes
if one is not aware that this is taking place, then it seems as if people are to blame, when there is external influence that people have no idea is even existing, because people believe that their thoughts, their feelings, and their experiences are their own. When
So,
sometimes those thoughts, those experiences are implanted or injected, or sometimes they even have false memories that aren't even real. But they act as if they are, they live their life as if the stories are real, when that may not actually be the case.
so the Archon would like to ruin groups of like-minded people because groups are
Yes.
powerful. It makes sense.
And cause dissension within those groups, correct? And
Okay.
so if the members of that group are not truly self-aware, which usually within groups you may have varying degrees of consciousness, people who are very far along in their self-awareness, and those that are just starting on their self-awareness, and then those that have the perception of being far along in their self-awareness, but they actually are not. It's just the ego story and the self-gratification, or the the feeling of self-importance, right? So they have ego aggrandizement. Those people are very dangerous because they end up oftentimes as leaders that are wounded and damaged, and they end up inflicting their own wounds and damage upon their followers out of their own ego and hubris, instead of seeing it for what it is. And so, because of those gaps in their own armor, you have the Archon that will come through those and dissolve or create friction in those groups.
Oh, makes so much sense. Speaking of the Archon and protecting oneself, who governs and guards places like Egypt and those portals?
Specifically with Egypt, we would say that there are a couple things. There is the Egyptian pantheon of gods, right? The Egyptian hierarchy of gods and goddesses, which those consciousnesses act to continue carrying out their roles that they have been a part of for thousands of years.